Good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio. I'm your host, Royce White, and I am here at Free People Radio in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The day is Monday, March 13th, the year of our Lord 2023, and this is episode 16, I believe, right, Zane? Episode 16 we have today. And we always want to say thank you to all the new subscribers and listeners and viewers and fans of the podcast and supporters of Free People Radio. A little bit of housekeeping. If you didn't get a chance, I implore you to go back to Friday's Family and Friends guest episode with the great Steve Bannon. I interviewed one of the great political minds of our era. We know we had a little bit of technical difficulties on the first release on Friday where people could only hear out of one ear if they had their headphones on. If you didn't have your headphones on, you could hear the entire episode fine. But I know for those who may be listening in the audio or on the audio platform, sometimes you all listen on your headphones as well. And you know, we apologize for any inconvenience on the technical side. We take it very serious to bring you a consistent and quality product. Which is why we fixed a version of the Steve Bannon episode, both on the audio platform and on YouTube and Rumble, and all of those should be available now. So for those who didn't get a chance to see the Steve Bannon episode, make sure you go back and select the fixed version so that you can, hear the great Steve Bannon talk about the perils of our time and the politics of our time. Other housekeeping, we are looking to set up a platform, a patron platform, and a shop, a store with products. We got a number of merchandise ideas that we think the fans will enjoy. Definitely a Spit on the Floor t-shirt is in the works. Pete Booty Peg t-shirt is in the works, and some others. So that should be coming soon. We'll keep you updated on that. And our patron platform, we're trying to sort out, I think we'll have 3 different places that we can accept patronage from people, because hard to know which platforms are going to go woke and what you'll say on which platforms that'll get you deplatformed and ultimately stop your ability to receive donations and patronage. Right now, we're looking at 3 platforms: Locals, which is a host of a number of conservative voices, also a platform called Subscribestar, and DonorBox. Now, DonorBox is the one that's a little bit shaky. We were going to originally work off of Patreon, but our good friend Tim Gordon from the Rules for Retrograde podcast was suspended from Patreon. And there are a number of podcasters out there that really have worked for a long time to build up their audience in podcasts, and the fans and patrons that they have on a monthly basis really take care of their family and are the way that they survive and their form of their main source of income. So to have Patreon take or suspend the great Tim Gordon was a sign that we should probably look at other options than Patreon. I know a lot of people are familiar with Patreon, but we don't appreciate that type of censorship and deplatforming. So I don't know if DonorBox, I haven't heard much that DonorBox has deplatformed or censored anybody yet, but I do believe that DonorBox is tilting more woke, and we'll see that happen in the future. So we're going with DonorBox to start, and we're going to give you the option of all 3 to begin. But we got a watchful eye on DonorBox, and we're very confident about Subscribestar and Locals. So a little bit of housekeeping for the day. We have our guests lined up for this week. We may, in fact, have a special guest pop up this week, in which case Wednesday and Friday's episode may end up being guest episodes. And we'll have that happen throughout the duration of the podcast. And as guests, start to increase, we may add an extra day of the podcast, and it'll be a surprise episode. Hopefully we'll build a consistent following and sort of get a routine of people who are following the podcast, and you'll look up on one Thursday morning and go, wow, or great, there's an extra guest episode from one of our great family and friends out there. So that's something to look forward to. But this week we may in fact have the first week with a Wednesday and Friday guest episode. Or I may actually do a Wednesday episode and a guest episode back to back. I don't know yet. We're in the infancy. We're in the beginning stages of this podcast, and we're still working out the schedule. We want to give you as much content as possible, and I don't really believe that the schedule isn't flexible. So, can you start the clock for me, Zane? I appreciate it. So, with that housekeeping out of the way, I want to say thank you again to all the new subscribers. We are available on all major audio platforms: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, and iHeartRadio. We do air all of our episodes on Rumble as well for all of our Rumble followers. We're going to continue to premiere at 9 p.m. on YouTube, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That's 9 p.m. Central. And as well as looking into Twitch and Odyssey. All of our episodes are backed up on BitChute currently, Free People Radio BitChute. And we're also looking into streaming or beginning to stream the episodes on Getter and Facebook, or creating a stream link so we can stream the episodes across all platforms that allow us to do so. Doing as much as we can to try and, broaden the scope of places that people can find the podcast. We know that the algorithm is going to work against a podcast like this. We don't play with funny titles that pander to, whatever the algorithm wants you to pay attention to. And there's all these ways to grow your YouTube channel. If you go and look into it, it's like if you title a video a certain way with certain keywords, you'll basically latch on to the algorithms, for other videos or other hot topics. We don't want to mess around with that. And in fact, even furthermore, we tend to deal with people and topics that the algorithm specifically doesn't want to reward in the search, such as all the prevailing topics that we've talked about so far: the Church of LGBTQ, Satanism, globalism, the war in Ukraine, person like Steve Bannon, even Chris Martinson talking about COVID and Jesus Christ. And there's a lot of these topics that seem to stay in the purview of or the scope of censorship from big tech, but we're not going to shy away from that in any way. We're just going to hope that you, as fans and subscribers and listeners and viewers, will be force multipliers. And in order to do that, like and subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment on the video. If you're in the chat, man the chat if you can. I think all of those things help us with the algorithm. So enough with the housekeeping for the day. Welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy. I hope you go and enjoy the Family and Friends episode from Friday with the great Steve Bannon. Today, this came across my desk. I have here a national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. And as I just said in the intro, this is another one of those topics that would easily fall under the rubric of needing to be censored. I mean, I think they actually explicitly lay the censorship out in this document in so many words. But this came across my desk. This is from June 2021. And it's directly from the White House. This is National Security Council from the White House, the Joe Biden administration. And the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. Now, most of our episodes here, I just go off of the top of the head. I just monologue. Rarely do I use documents. And in some of the earlier episodes, I said that the two most important things, are the two most pressing matters that the American people, American citizens, should be concerned about are, number one, inflation and the monetary policy of the Fed and other global governing institutions, monetary policy setting institutions, such as the IMF and World Bank and so on and so forth, the chain of Federal Reserves. And then the war in the Ukraine and the proposition of nuclear war. So those have been the two mastheads of the show so far. But now I think we're going to pivot and switch directions, because ultimately, there's a five-headed hydra of the West, a five-headed hydra of New World Order. And that five-headed hydra is the military and the three industrial complexes: military, medicine, and media. And then you have big tech, which is now the eye in the sky, or that's the capstone of the New World Order. And underneath you have the central bank cartel, right? this sort of this worldwide international banking cartel. And really the banking cartel, so you can, I say that's the five-headed hydra because all these other institutions and industries or uh, industries, places that that you would say are a big deal in society, you can rightfully categorize or file into one of these categories. For example, like food. Food is definitely a medical industrial complex matter. Education is definitely a media industrial complex matter. Policing is certainly a military industrial complex matter. Information would teeter between being a media industrial complex matter and a big tech matter now, but the information is kind of sits across the entire landscape in some respect. Each pillar deals with information in some capacity. But the central banking cartel is an interesting one, and they have a very unique role in the entire equation. And that role is they actually oversee the valuation of energy. Okay, so energy, oil, all of those would actually fall into the international banking cartel or the central banking cartel group, in my opinion. Now, does the military and media and medicine and big tech deal with energy as well? Absolutely. But the banking cartel, effectively what banking and currency is the management of value or the prediction or, what they call futures and all these other financial terms and financial mechanisms that control energy. Right. They invest in energy. They predict the output of energy. They manage and control the use of energy. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here today with this document. So we have the five-headed hydra of New World Order in the West. And those, again, big tech is the new eye in the sky. That's the capstone. That's the eye of the pyramid you usually see at the tip. And if you reverse engineer it, you would think that when this sort of Freemason secret society, there are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences, as the great Steve Bannon always says. We grew in an upward trajectory towards the capstone or the apex of an attempt at world domination, and the eye in the sky, the 1984, as so many brilliant and prophetic writers and philosophers and leaders of society have predicted in the past. Dystopia, technocracy is always the final turn of any prediction of tyranny. So let's talk a little bit about this five-headed hydra, number one. But let's also think about where the citizenship of you all in the audience as individuals comes into play, because a lot of these new world order agendas all rely on you complying, and a lot of them are engaged upon or they are pursued in an attempt to make you comply or force you to comply or I want to say persuade you to comply. And if you go back and you read the early notes, if you go back and you read some of the quotes from our intelligence community, such as William Casey, who said, you'll know our agenda, you'll know our mission is complete when everything the American public believes is false. Another thing that was said from members within the CIA is they're very good at creating the circumstance for people to be killed. Right. And that's just a scary and dark thing to think about in general, especially as citizens. But what they're saying, in effect, is that the best way to get something done at a mass scale is to get people to agree, to get people to comply, to get people to willfully participate or willfully surrender their rights or their freedoms or whatever the case may be. Right. And we focused a lot so far in the podcast talking about black people. And I want to say why too, because a lot of people go, oh, the things you're saying aren't just about black people. They apply to everyone. And a lot of that is true, actually. Or they'll say, oh, why are you talking about race at all? Or why are you dissing black people, or whatever the case may be. Look, we don't shy away from race on this podcast. And there will be times where I talk about other cultures or demographics. And ultimately, I think we all are human. But culture is a huge deal. Identity is a huge deal. Where a person comes from, the community they were raised in, how they were raised, there's layers to it. Just like we laid out the NWO and this five-headed hydra, or this stratification of New World Order, there's also a stratification in how people develop, how people are raised, what influences people. Community, your family, your parents, your brothers and sisters, the school you go to, your teachers. There's a number of things. And ultimately, we see in many places in the country that certain places tend to group certain demographics of people, whether that be by age, whether that be by race, whether that be by, job type or occupation. You think about in New York City, they have the fashion district, or the garment district, or there are we live in time and space. Time and space isn't everything, but we do live in time and space, and in doing so, people group themselves together. Now, that's not a justification for racism or anything else. Quite the opposite. In fact, I think we should talk more about race so that we can sort out all of these weaponized narratives. And there are many, and I'm going to get to them today. But we're going to shift focus from being from the proposition of nuclear war and the Fed and their monetary policy to this document here, National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. And again, I'll tell you why. Because as an individual who speaks about issues that are laid out in this document, I feel a certain sense of personal, I don't want to say anxiety, but personal interest in this document. And I think a lot of people who watch this show would have a personal interest in this document because effectively what it says is, if you are a Christian, a white Christian, if you deny the vaccine, or if you deny the integrity of our elections, you are a domestic terrorist. And I'm going to show you how they use fluff language to outline that. And this is the document for everybody. You all can go print this. Actually, I would encourage you to go to, I think it's the whitehouse.gov or maybe it's the Federal Register. I'm not sure, but I would assume it's the whitehouse.gov. And you can print out this document, right? This document here says, right there, National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. And, it's not a huge document, but it says some very interesting things. And then we're going to get to that here. Let's see what the opening page says, just to give you guys here, you got a pretty, it's so elementary, some of these things that they put out. It's like a Word document here that for a White House staff that's probably burning, I don't know how much cash and salaries and things like that, the media department or the digital department or the document department there is pretty elementary. This came from the website, directly from the website. They just crudely pasted a picture here on top of this opening paragraph. I don't want to make too much of that, but it's just like, can we take some pride in the things that the nation's most important office and maybe the most important political office in the world puts out to the public? Don't just crudely take a Word document and post a picture of the American flag in the top of the, come on, you got to be kidding me. This speaks volumes here, but okay. This is the first page of this document, and it says, too often, and I'm going to read some here. Too often over the past several years, American communities have felt the wrenching pain of domestic terrorism. Black church members slaughtered during their Bible study in Charleston. Notice how they go with the black people first. Okay, so for all you, why are you bringing up race? Why are you talking about black people like this? I'm showing you right in the opening paragraph why I'm talking about demographic the way I am. Black church members, they get slaughtered during their Bible study in Charleston, which was a great tragedy, and we our thoughts and prayers are with the victims of that tragic attack. A synagogue in Pittsburgh targeted for supporting immigrants. There you go. We got the Jews. They're getting in the game. A gunman spraying bullets at an El Paso Walmart to target Latinos. Oh, we got to bring the Hispanics and Latinos in. It goes against everything our country strives to stand for in the world, and it poses a direct challenge to America's national security, our democracy, and our national unity. The National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism lays out a comprehensive approach to addressing the threat while safeguarding bedrock American civil rights and civil liberties, values that make us who we are as a nation. So that was the opening paragraph of this document. And I mean, already they're laying out the race card. I mean, they're laying out the race narrative right there. And it sounds good. I mean, if you're somebody who sees behind the curtain, I don't even need to open this up. For me, for somebody who studies this stuff and watches how these administrations and these leaders behave and what comes out of their mouth and what comes out of their ass effectively, I didn't even need to read this. I could look at the title of the document and safely guess what it was going to say. And I actually did. As soon as I saw the document, it came across my desk. I said, "Oh, I know blacks and Jews are going to be laid out in the opening, the opening thoughts." And sure enough, they were. But I want to get more into the specifics of how this this whole strategy starts to get real tricky. I mean, it's tricky for some. It's tricky for those who get their politics with their French fries. Because if you get your politics with your French fries, number one, they are hoping that you never even read this document, let alone that somebody who has a podcast, a rising podcast, would take the time to read it to you or direct you to it or actually go over the details of the document itself in depth. So they're hoping that most of you are just jerk offs and you just don't care what your president or the executive branch are doing on a daily basis, and that's a sad proposition in and of itself. But I'm going to do that for you here, so that but for the bourgeois, upper middle class, and elites who they know actually take their time to read documents like this, they say all the things that help those people feel okay about it at night. And so they use this fluff language. It's the same. And what's interesting is maybe I have an affinity to understand and see through the bullshit because we were trained as athletes in this sort of media industrial complex fluff language. I mean, I actually went through a seminar coming into the NBA where we were trained by media people, by media experts to talk a certain way, to behave a certain way in front of the camera, or to talk around certain things that we maybe didn't want to have to address. I mean, extensive media training. And I don't mean, it wasn't like exhaustive media training and we were sitting there 9 hours like a robot, but it was a point of emphasis. And I only say that because the entire corporate media landscape for people who are in positions of public influence has two sort of distinct groups. Either you're a person who is intended to be controversial, and in that place, in that spot, you kind of say whatever you want because you saying the thing actually drives the traffic in business. And then there are the people who have to make public statements, but don't necessarily want to have an in-depth dialogue about any of the statements they make. Their intent is to kind of play the shadows, right? So you got your out there under the spotlight entertainment media industrial complex crew, and then you got the shadow crew. And the White House and our politics have become a shadow crew. That's why most of your politicians don't want to have to answer any questions on any ongoing basis. In fact, their people, their teams, hide them from the public. And in my political career, I hope to be, I don't want to say career, during my time in politics, I hope to be the exact opposite. Hence, I have a 2-hour podcast 3 times a week where I let you hear the things that I think and the things I say. You can go and listen back and judge them as you will. But in no way am I hiding from the American people or anybody else worldwide that listens or watches. So This document is straight fluff, straight up fluff, corporate jargon. But it means to drive home a very specific narrative. Here it is, introduction. I had these laid out the wrong way. Give me a second here while I send these papers back down the hatch the other way. Today's threat, persistent and evolved. Okay, here we go. Introduction. And I just, you can look through the document, but I skimmed through a couple of places. Here, the introduction says again, domestic terrorism is not a new threat in the United States. It has over centuries taken many American lives and spilled much American blood. True. Remember, propaganda is not straight lies. Propaganda is half truth, the truth taken out of context, and lies. Okay, so all three make up synthesize propaganda. So there's going to be truths littered all through here. You can't have, in fact, you could argue that you can't have propaganda without mixing in the truth because it won't resonate. It don't have any sort of connection for anybody who is even alive and doesn't live under a rock. I mean, somebody who lives under a rock, you could tell that the sky is, that we have trolls that live in underground tunnels, and I guess they'd have no frame of reference to deny it. But for people who are even remotely paying attention, you got to sprinkle the truth in there as well. So domestic terrorism is not a new threat in the United States. It has over centuries taken many American lives and spilled much American blood, especially in communities deliberately and viciously targeted on the basis of hatred and bigotry. Those are two new catchwords that you'll hear the left use a lot: hatred and bigotry. Just general categorizations of people who are hateful and people who are bigots. After the Civil War, for example, okay, we're going back to slavery, for example, the Ku Klux Klan, who were Democrats, that they won't say here, but is a fact, waged a campaign of terror to intimidate black voters and their white supporters. Okay, now here's something that really bothers me. I mean, and it really, really bothers me. Here in the document, they have the word black capitalized, and I understand that because people's identity is important. If you want to respect people's identity or race by capitalizing the word black, fine. But when they say white supporters, they have white lowercase. Small detail, but I have a huge problem with it. I don't even know if you probably aren't going to be able to see that from there. Please go get the document. I love if you go get the document, even if you have to watch this back a second time and you get the document and you follow along. I would really appreciate that and even encourage that. If you get the document on your own, go look in the introduction, on the introduction page. This is page 5 of the document. And the first paragraph, intimidate black voters with a capital B and their white supporters with a lowercase w. Now, if you're going to capitalize them, just capitalize both of them. I mean, I don't understand. This is an attack on the white identity. And I have no specific dog in that hunt other than that for anybody who is genuine, who has any ounce of integrity around these issues, whether it be race, politics, culture, society, religion, whatever it is, there's just a universal truth. And the universal truth is that already in this document about domestic terrorism, they're laying out a race narrative that uses woke terminology or woke vernacular or woke punctuation, and they're capitalizing the word black and they're lowercasing, they're using lowercase w for the word white. Completely ridiculous. Black voters and their white supporters and deprive them of political power, killing and injuring untold numbers of Americans. The Klan and other white supremacists, lowercase white again. Now, if you want to get technical, I would probably lowercase white in the word as a way to describe supremacists too, just like I would lowercase the B in black for black supremacists, right, or black terrorists. But white supporters, I mean, that's just a self-loathing, cuck-like. These are white woke liberals. I mean, I can just tell from the way that this whole thing is written. But anyway, White supremacists continue to terrorize Black Americans, Black capitalized again, and other minorities in the decades that followed. In recent years, we have seen a resurgence of this and related threats in one horrific incident after another. The shooting and killing of 23 people in El Paso, the vehicular killing of a peaceful protester in Charlottesville, the shooting and killing of 3 people at a garlic festival in Gilroy, the arson committed at a mosque in Victoria, Texas, the appalling rise in violence and xenophobia against Asian Americans, the surge in anti-Semitism, and more. I mean, okay. Let me just, I'm going to work my way through this here. This is a little difficult. I didn't pre-plan this and I didn't rehearse this, so I'm actually, doing this in real time. It's a little difficult to stay on track here because I want to deviate so much. But anyway, domestic terrorist attacks in the United States also have been committed frequently by those opposing our government institutions. I'll read that again. Domestic terrorist attacks in the United States also have been committed frequently by those who oppose our government institutions. And then it goes on to lay out some people who are considered extremists. And they got the Oklahoma City federal building bombing listed in there, a lone gunman at the, in Dallas who shot and killed the 5 officers. Whoa. Now, this is interesting. In 2016, an anti-authority violent extremist ambush shot and killed 5 police officers in Dallas. Now, it doesn't go out of its way to tell you that gunman was Black. They don't mention his race. They just say he's anti-government or he's an extremist, an anti-authority. So all the Black people, I'm telling you what the document is really saying. We read between the lines. All the white people, all the white men, all the Christian white men in the country, you can't trust at all, and all of them may in fact end up becoming domestic terrorists. But for any of those Black men out there who lose it, they're anti-authority. So the Black people are anti-authority. The white men are violent extremists or terrorists. I mean, you see how they're laying out the distinction right there. And in that, there's sort of a racism because it's what they're effectively saying is that there is no right, there is no righteous anti-authority movement. And that's when, I feel the sense to, even in talking about this, I feel the sense to have to be a little bit careful, but I'll probably butcher that in grand fashion here at the against the advice of my attorneys, because I mean, this document, the reason why I'm doing this is because the executive branch, our commander-in-chief, is in charge of the entire military and all the intelligence agencies. And if they want to use a document like this as the justification or the prerequisite to come and silence people, they can and they will do it. And they are starting to do it. I mean, they're starting to round up people now and bring, whether it be lawsuits, whether they use lawfare or actual criminal charges to silence people. They will do it. And as another reference, I mean, if you think about who Steve Bannon has been represented as in the mainstream media after January 6th, and you go back and you listen to the interview of him on Friday, 2 completely different people. I didn't think anything Steve said on Friday was even controversial, let alone extreme. And certainly not dangerous. It's certainly dangerous to the prevailing status quo of corrupt power there in D.C., but it's not dangerous to anybody's immediate safety, unless you think of it at the most extreme stretch of the imagination and the outcome or the trajectory of what would happen if one started to wrestle with the ideas that are being discussed. Because there is a war coming, and actually we're already fighting a war. And what Steve and I did mention on Friday is the enemy within. And I think Steve articulated it. This is why they say Steve is one of the most dangerous political minds in the world, because the things he says make you think at a level that question the whole setup. I mean, the whole foundation. And one of the most interesting things I thought he said on Friday was that in 2008, the financial crisis or the collapse of the housing market did to the American economy what none of the bad guys we had fought in the 20th or 21st century had done to the American economy. Whether it be Saddam or Bin Laden or Stalin or Hitler or Mussolini or Tojo or any of these characters, any of these spooky boogeyman characters that we fought against, and we had to use the full force and military might of the American of our nation to fight. None of them could do to us what we did to ourselves. And what that highlights is an enemy within, right? An enemy within, a corrupt elite, status quo, purveyors of a corrupt status quo and steady hands from within. So we're already at war. And you could argue that a nation is always at war with people who want to preserve the prosperity and overall health of that nation and people who want to subvert and bring that nation to its knees. And there are always traitors. There are always people inside your walls. Our founding fathers laid that out. And while they talk about the Constitution and what makes America America, they do a good job, not to mention any of our founding fathers in the opening parts of this document or, the juxtaposition to this domestic terrorist point of view, because there is a point of view out there that is dangerous for some. Actually, it's dangerous for everybody involved, but it's the idea that I said last week where Malcolm was quoted, or I played the video where Malcolm X, the price of freedom is death. And he wasn't the first to say it. Thomas Jefferson was the first to say it on the record that's of note, that the price of freedom is death. The tree of liberty must be refreshed with the blood of patriots. This is a dangerous proposition. And even it's a proposition that would be considered the pretext for domestic terrorism. And that's effectively what the document is saying. But when they talked about the gunman in Texas, they failed to mention his race whatsoever, and that's not by accident. Moving on. Domestic terrorist attacks in the United States also have been committed frequently by those opposing our government institutions. Don't oppose the government. There's another underlined piece that I thought was interesting. This comes from page 6, the next page. The intelligence and law enforcement communities have articulated publicly the threat posed by domestic terrorism today. The articulation draws on the comprehensive assessment of the threat that President Biden requested on his first full day in office. That assessment, the President of the United States requested a comprehensive assessment of domestic terrorism on his first full day in office. Well, why? Because January 6th was the dominant narrative, and we had to fight against these domestic terrorists, these MAGA terrorists, which we now are starting to uncover may have in fact been promulgated by a variety of intelligence community agencies, that there may have been involvement with many intelligence agencies in this. And although they play the race card, they do well not to draw any attention to the fact that we have historical precedents to tell us that the intelligence community has been used in the past to subvert civil rights and liberty movements such as the Nation of Islam or the Black Panthers or even Martin Luther King himself, who they prop up on a mantle. They put his bust in your schools or in every Black community all across the country. There's always an MLK Boulevard, and it just so happens that turn the other cheek and peace and all these Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King type of sentiments never are the circumstance where MLK Boulevard is. And again, these things I can speak to. I had somebody say to me over the weekend, when you talk about Black people like they're a monolith. No, they're not a monolith. But there is a circumstance in Black America across this country that I am speaking to. And if I'm speaking to you, then if it applies to you, I'm speaking to you. If it doesn't apply to you, then shut the fuck up. I'm not talking to you. But in every city across the country, usually Black communities or inner cities, there's an MLK Boulevard. And where there is an MLK Boulevard, you usually have some presence of drugs and crime and violence and so on and so forth. And I don't think that's by accident either. So it's interesting that already in this document, they're trying to bring credibility to the same intelligence communities. The same intelligence and law enforcement communities are the ones doing the assessment on domestic terrorism, and we should trust them because Joe Biden is this bastion of integrity and a great track record there in D.C. in his own career. So we should trust him, and we should trust the intelligence community when it comes to domestic terrorists, even though it's based on the idea of race and bigotry. And we should overlook the history that these same intelligence communities were targeted black people. I mean, let's just cut the shit. They targeted black people right out in the open. They even brag about it in the minutes and the notes from their intelligence agency meetings. So that assessment was conducted by appropriate elements of the U.S. government and provided to the president. It was also released publicly in summary form on March 17th, 2021. See page 10. Today's domestic terrorists espouse a range of violent ideological motivations, including racial and ethnic bigotry. There they go again. I mean, they don't quit. Domestic terrorism is both persistent and evolving. It's getting worse. Oh, the domestic terrorism is at your door. It's coming. If we, the federal government and the elite and illustrious intelligence community do not stand in the way, the KKK will ride from town to town and rape and pillage and kill your women and children. This is what the document wants you to believe. But it doesn't say go get you a gun. It never says get yourself a gun in the off chance that these people show up in your town so you can defend yourself. You need to give us more money to do more assessments so that we can preemptively or proactively intercept these people and protect you. Good luck to them. I mean, hey, good luck to you if you believe this crock of shit, that these people are going to proactively protect you from psychopathic, violent criminals. Good luck to you. I probably can't help you. You could just turn the podcast off now. Ethnic bigotry and hatred, as well as anti-government and anti-authority sentiment. So see, they're clumping those in together. Racial and ethnic bigotry and anti-government and anti-authority sentiment is all one. It's all one. You know, what they're saying is if you're against the government, if you don't believe in the government, if you're a conspiracy theorist is really what they're saying. If you're somebody who doesn't believe in legitimate authority of this administration or of the prevailing post-World War II democratic liberal order, if you don't believe in that or if you contest that or if you're a dissident, you're in the same group with the Ku Klux Klan. And that's effectively what they did to Steve Bannon, which is why I thought this was so important to read on the back of the interview with Steve Bannon, is because when I can't tell you how many people, Zane, I saw a comment and they say, oh, you lose me every time I like you, but you lose me every time every time you talk about Bannon or every time you promote Bannon, you lose me because Bannon's a racist, Bannon's a white supremacist, Bannon's a white nationalist. Bannon's a conspiracy theorist or extremist, or he's an election denier, or he's a vaccine denier, or whatever the case may be. This is the scam. This is why I'm able to confidently promote and be friends with Steve Bannon and accept his mentorship, because I'm diligent enough. I take myself serious enough to look through the reality that helps me see through all of the bullshit. And the bullshit is that if you're anti-government, if you're anti-federal government, the expansion of federal government, the expansion of the welfare state, globalism, you might as well just sign up for the KKK. I mean, Royce, you got the bald head already. You know, you're a little fair in the skin. The black people will say you're barely black anyway. You might as well just join the KKK, buddy. And to that I say, artifice. They also take on a variety of, I'm reading from the document again, they also take on a variety of forms from lone actors and small groups of informally aligned individuals to networks exhorting and targeting violence towards specific communities, to violent self-proclaimed militias. So now they're saying all the people from your loosely associated networks of individuals who share these ideas, they're not directly connected, they're loosely connected. So it could be Steve Bannon, it could be Alex Jones, it could be Jason Whitlock, it could be Royce White, it could be Carrie Lake, it could be Christina Caramo. All of these individuals from these small informal networks that share these ideas are linked to these militias who take their marching orders from these people, I guess they're trying to insinuate, or vice versa. And this is spelled out right here in the document that came from the president's office and the White House. This is national security matters. So when they say that I talk about national security or the intelligence community and it's some type of conspiracy theory, these are the documents and the paper trail. Understand what they're doing. And it's not, as I go through it, I start to get a little more pissed off. And I apologize, but it starts to really click for me. It starts to really resonate as I move through these type of things episode by episode. But what they're really doing here is creating a paper trail. They're creating a paper trail, a formal paper trail with the backing of your tax money to agencies and institutions like the intelligence community that's paid for by your tax money, or money that we go and pirate from some other place, which is also paid for by your tax money. Well, like Bannon said, it's on the back of the American people. They're creating a paper trail that's intended to justify taking away your freedoms and your rights. This is a paper trail. This is the over litigiousness of our nation. This is the American executive branch and the judicial branch and the congressional branch. This is the three branches of government. This is the three branches of government coming together in a corrupt neocon, neoliberal order and creating a paper trail to take your freedoms from you, to justify it. Across, you got a variety of forms, from lone actors and small groups of informally aligned individuals to networks exhorting and targeting violence towards specific communities, to violent self-proclaimed militias who, despite legal prohibitions in all 50 states against certain private militia activity, assert a baseless right to take the law into their own hands. You can't take the law into your own hands. You can't form a militia. And I want to show you the significance of this. The significance is this is exactly what they used to justify the illegal wiretaps on Malcolm X. Malcolm X was in the later part of his life, or right there towards the later part of his life before he was assassinated. Malcolm X was a huge advocate of rifle clubs. And in the affidavits that were used to justify the wiretaps for Malcolm X from the FBI were these rifle clubs. I mean, this now behind the scenes, they'll say it was his nefarious activity on the international stage with known communists. And I want to talk about that in a little bit, maybe in another episode. I'm not sure yet, but that's what they'll go back and read. They'll go back and read that it wasn't actually the rifle clubs. It was the nefarious communist activity on the world stage that led to Malcolm's surveillance. And I'm not saying that the communism wasn't a real thing or that communism isn't a threat, or it still isn't a threat, because it certainly is. Maybe, in fact, the biggest threat. But these communists didn't care about Malcolm X's communism. And these communists have been in there since Malcolm X was there. And Bannon laid that out as well, how the entire movement towards China, or the opening China as the great new horizon, was in effect us backing a communist regime in China versus the opposite, and doing so because of the communists we had in our own State Department, in our own government, in D.C. at the time. The two sides of the same coin, and they'll have you believe that they were surveilling Malcolm X because of the communism, but really it was the rifle clubs. Okay, because that's what communists do. Communists don't care whether you're communist or not. Really, the goal is to strip the people of any individual sovereignty to create a super state. And that's exactly what they're laying out here. If you're anti-government, if you're anti-authority, you're racist, you're a bigot, you all are clumped together. Across violent ideologies, individuals and small groups, both formal and informal, that means, you could be connected or we could just say you're connected, have been galvanized by recent political and societal events in the United States to carry out violent attacks. Among that wide range of animating ideologies, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, principally those who promote the superiority of the white race. And they, again, have the word white lowercase. And militia, violent extremists are assessed as presenting the most persistent and lethal threat. What they're saying here is the prevailing idea post 9/11 that the biggest threat of domestic terrorism were radical Muslims. We're now shifting that white people, white extremists, people who promote the white race are the most persistent, lethal threats. And now let me say this. No one can deny that the majority of mass shootings are done by white people. Nobody could deny that. But the majority of killings by guns then in America are done by black men, especially per percentage. So you have to be able to say both things in the same breath. And if you say that, this is where the Jason Whitlocks sort of get a lot of hate from the black community, but they draw such a stark point about these types of documents, agendas, narratives, and the numbers. If white men are the most dangerous threat because of their mass murders or their politically motivated or their politically animating ideologies that lead to violence, then what do you call local gangs in black communities? Are they domestic terrorists? Well, in fact, they are domestic terrorists by the government's criteria, and they use the same justification to surveil any young black men that they need to unconstitutionally, whether they're breaking the law or not. And there you see how there's a sort of dragnet. There's a dragnet of the federal government, of the state, of big government, of these woke, liberal, neoliberal elites. Showing you how the whole thing works. Uniparty, uniparty, uniparty. You have to say it 3 times like Beetlejuice. The most lethal threat is the white race. Moving on. Today's threat, page 8. Oh, this gets great. According to this assessment, one key aspect of today's domestic terrorism threat emerges from racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists and networks whose racial and ethnic or religious hatred leads them toward violence. I mean, they just continue back to back to back the whole document. I mean, page after page. This is saying the exact same thing. They just worded a little different. As well as those whom they encourage to take violent action. Right? Now, this is the Alex Jones narrative. This is the Alex Jones scam they're running here, is saying, not only is it people who are violent extremists, anybody who encourages people to take violent action, right? This is effectively the destruction of the First Amendment. What they're saying is you, with your speech, are responsible for what anybody else does who hears it. And they don't really even have to prove that they directly acted on your word. That you were given direction from them. They don't have to prove that, formal or informal. I listened to the late, great Rush Limbaugh on talk radio, and I thought to myself, God, he's got a point. I'm going to go get a gun and shoot up a mosque. Is Rush Limbaugh responsible for that? I mean, if Rush Limbaugh is responsible for that, then you could just as well say that anything that's said from the podium of any political office in this country holds responsibility for the things people do as well. And that's part of that is true. But what they're saying here is we aren't culpable for anything tragic or violent that takes place. Our actions, our political decisions, our policies, our corrupt crony capitalist, neoliberal, neocon policies, the entire scam of elective politics, that has no culpability in what people choose to do. We're not making people crazy. We're not cutting deals in Silicon Valley or with the corrupt central banking cartel or the three industrial complexes. We're not pushing people to be crazy. We're not pushing people to be violent. We're not making people feel demoralized. That's not us. It's only the people who are telling you the truth about our policies. They're telling you the truth about our actions. They're telling you the truth about how we operate. Only those people can hold culpability. This is fucking tyranny. This document here is the herald of tyranny. They're telling you we're going to be tyrannical. And not only are we going to be tyrannical, but we're going to be tyrannical in an unprecedented manner. Why? Because the federal government of the United States of America has become one of the biggest leviathans in the history of human civilization. And they have the weight and the reach and the resources. And even more importantly, the compliance of the American people that give them such power. We have that power. We've created and instantiated that level of power. So we can come right out and tell you, we're going to be tyrannical. And if you oppose us, we'll just say you're a terrorist. Another key component of the threat comes from anti-government and anti-authority violent extremists. This significant component of today's threat includes self-proclaimed militias and militia violent extremists who take steps to violently resist government authority or facilitate the overthrow of the U.S. government based on perceived overreach, anarchist violent extremists who violently oppose all forms of capitalism, corporate globalization, and governing institutions which they perceive as harmful to society, sovereign citizen violent extremists who believe they are immune from government authority and laws. I mean, just look at all the keywords. If you oppose capitalism, if you oppose, funny that the neoliberal Marxists who call themselves anti-capitalists first lay out here that the violent opposition of capitalism is one of the heralds of domestic terrorism. Wow. Uniparty, neocon, neoliberal order, world order, corporate globalization. Oh, if you talk about globalism, you're a fucking terrorist. But which they perceive as harmful, right? Anything that they perceive as harmful to society, that's a herald of terrorism there. I'm just going to keep going here a little bit. Here we go. This is the last one I'll read, and then we'll just talk about this for a little bit. This is the strategic pillar. The strategic goal, 1.1, pillar 1, understand and share domestic terrorism related information. Strategic goal, enhance domestic terrorism related research and analysis. Oh, when you say research or analysis, you get the Marxist neoliberal academia community in a tizzy, boy. When you say research and analysis, the prevailing bourgeoisie elite in this country just feel, they just feel a sense of purpose. They feel a sense of belonging and reliability. They feel a sense of expertise. They feel a sense of general safety, security. When you say research and analysis, people from the academic world, they just feel that this is ironclad. This is rock solid. This whole document is based on research and analysis. This is why it's pillar 1, because you got to get the academic institutions on board, because they're the only people who fucking read this. The academics are the only people who actually read this shit. Okay? Because the academics are smart enough to actually read the fine print. They've been trained and conditioned to read the fine print. So they actually read this. They don't do their politics with French fries. They do their politics with headlines, and they do it with documentation. They're creating a paper trail. And every once in a while, you'll get an outlier from the prevailing political and academic ideology that puts up a red flag and says, whoa, 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 you guys are going too far here, right? Sometimes those people are in on it. Sometimes they're the controlled opposition to make the whole thing look legitimate. It's like playing three-card Monte. This is why I talk about the three-card Monte. It's like playing three-card Monte out there on the strip in Vegas. You got the guy who comes in and wins, who's in on the scam, the three-card Monte scam, to make the whole thing look legitimate, like you could actually win. And they even let some people win. But the whole scam across the entire day is meant to hustle the majority of people. The house always wins. I don't care if you're at Caesar's Palace or the Wynn, or you're out there on the street with a three-card Monte hustler. It's the same scam. The global affects the local. Here we go. Strategic pillars. Goal number 1, enhance domestic terrorism-related research and analysis. They're going to enhance their surveillance. They're going to enhance the reach of the intelligence community that they needed to create this assessment and prepare this document for sharing. Addressing any threat effectively requires understanding it thoroughly. Oh, you got to be thorough. For today's shifting and diverse domestic terrorism threat, that task is imperative. The federal government continues to augment and improve how the domestic terrorism threat is analyzed and understood. The audacity of these people is quite astonishing. I mean, it is quite awe-inspiring that they just come. What's funny about it is they find so many eloquent ways to say this in a sort of roundabout, sneaky weasel like manner. The federal government continues to augment and improve how the domestic terrorism threat is analyzed and understood. We continue to grow. We continue to grow in our understanding that you should just willingly accept. You should feel really good about. This is a great thing. You should feel great about this because the KKK after the Civil War. Remember them? Remember the Democrat KKK right after the Civil War? Do you remember those guys? You should feel good about the ever expansion of the federal government today because remember, slavery. Okay. This is the type of shit that should offend black people. This is why I talk to black people, because the shit that they think they can pass on you is so absurd and audacious. I wonder how you can look in the mirror with any pride as a black person in this country if you're not fighting these people, if you're not making the list. See, I made the list. You sell out motherfuckers. I make the list. When they list the white supremacist or the white radical extremist or the right-wing conspiracy theorist in the New York Times or the Washington Post, they put my face up there. You think that's by fucking accident? And to finish here, we got about 30 minutes. What's our time? What time we at right now? 1:03. Okay, we got a little bit of time. You think that's by fucking accident? That they put my face up there with the white supremacists? Where do I make the list? Am I an anti-government, anti-authority anarchist? I had a local community nonprofit black man here in Minneapolis called me an anarchist one time during the George Floyd uprising. Funny, they're the ones taking money for federal grants that are intended to perpetuate the scam. And I'm marching 15,000 people to the Federal Reserve and preaching nonviolence. We're doing silent protests. I mean, how violent could a silent protest be out in the streets? It's like the least violent thing possible. There's nothing anarchist about it. But they support initiatives that use the same language and jargon like violence and race violence or ethnic bigotry and hatred that Antifa uses. This is like an Antifa document. This is an anti-American, anti-God, Antifa pandering document. In fact, it doesn't even. In fact, It doesn't even mention Antifa in here. I mean, how could you mention domestic terrorism and not mention Antifa? I would venture to guess that Antifa is not mentioned in this entire document. I didn't look through it. I can't confirm, but I would venture to guess, please, somebody check it out there for me. Somebody check it for me. In fact, in the next episode that we have, I don't know if Wednesday or Friday is gonna be a guest or not, but we'll figure it out. The next solo episode I have, I will find out if the word Antifa pops up in this entire domestic terrorist document. And if it doesn't, it's telling. And if it's not emphasized, it's telling. We're going to expand the federal government because the KKK, they're still out there somewhere. They're still out there. Racism is afoot. Okay? Analysis of key trends and trajectories are now regularly generated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Department of Homeland Security, with support from National Counterterrorism Center and others as appropriate, and then shared widely across the federal government. These analyses benefit from the continued tracking of domestic terrorism, related investigations and prosecutions across federal law enforcement and nationwide, and moreover, will benefit from increased exploration of publicly available threat-related information consistent with applicable law and guidelines. Are you hearing this, Zane? Is this spooky or what? Let me read this to you again. These analyses benefit from the continued tracking of domestic terrorism, related investigations and prosecutions across federal law enforcement and nationwide, and moreover, will benefit from increased exploration of publicly available threat-related information consistent with applicable law and guidelines. Additionally, a comprehensive understanding of the domestic terrorism threat landscape requires facilitating a systemic provision of information and data to the appropriate parts of the federal government from state, local, tribal, and territorial partners who often identify and disrupt manifestations of public terrorism. We're going to expand. We're going to expand, and we're going to take the power away from local and state municipalities, local and state government. We're going to take the power away from local and state government in the interest of fighting domestic terrorism. And again, domestic terrorism is it's hard to describe. We know it's racism. We know it's bigotry. But we can call anything we want racism or bigotry, or even better, hatred. We can call anything we want hatred. We can call the denial of vaccine mandates hatred or bigotry. We can call the questioning of election integrity hatred or bigotry or white supremacy. And we certainly, last but not least, most importantly, we can call Christianity hatred and bigotry. So if you're a Christian, if you're a vaccine denier, if you're an election denier, you're a domestic terrorist that we need to keep track of through the expansion of government. And all you other people out there that listen to Rachel Maddow and Joyanne Reed or Morning Mika. I know it's Morning Joe, but Joe's a cuck and Mika's really running the show. So we call it Morning Mika here at Please Call Me Crazy. If you listen to the headlines or you read the headlines on those shows, you need to be afraid. I mean, these people are radical. They're radical. Look at Paul Pelosi. Look at Paul Pelosi. If we don't expand the federal government, these crazy MAGA supporters will burst into your home unannounced in a crazed conspiracy theorist rage and crack you over the head with a hammer. These people are crazy. This is the most important thing that the American people need to be concerned about. This is the precursor. This is the pretext. This is the justification for tyranny, for dystopia, for 1984. This is it. This document, the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. This is the most important fucking document in America today. This, I'll say it again, for you beta male, cuck, lukewarm, pacifists out there. This is the most important fucking document in America today. If you oppose us, you're a terrorist. I mean, how did we let it get here? I'll tell you how we let it get here. At each turn, the neocon, neoliberal order went after both sides, people who are dissidents on both sides, and they used the intelligence community and the desire for convenience from the American people who were progressively getting more fat, prosperous, and detached from reality and God. They used that circumstance to justify along the way going after dissidents on both sides of the political aisle. That's what they did. Whether it was Malcolm, whether it was JFK, whether it was this, that person, it doesn't matter. Anybody who's a dissident, we'll clip them out. And we'll use the emotional animus. We'll use the zeitgeist on that side of the political spectrum to justify doing it. We'll play them against one another. And so when it was Malcolm, it was, oh, well, Malcolm was a communist. And then when it was JFK, it was, oh, JFK was a philanderer, or his dad was a bootlegger, or he was tied up with the mob, or he was screwing Marilyn Monroe, or whatever the story is that they need to put out there, right? And for whoever else it is, it'll be the Black Panthers, or they were drug dealers, right? They were drug dealers, they were communists, they were socialists. And I want to speak to people out there, and this goes for Black people and white people and everybody else. You have to understand the progression of our nation's history in order to understand how these institutions, these governing bodies, were used to isolate and eliminate dissidents. And yes, there was a time when communism was considered the main threat to American stability or American safety, but truly, out of that time period, communism was effectively led into our government. So did we really win the war against communism? Did communism go away? See, the story was told that the threat of communism was Russia. But really the threat of communism, Russia, China, communism writ large, Che Guevara, okay, Castro, right? All these people. But really, America's neoliberal order may be one of the most powerful communist institutions in the entire world. In sentiment and scope and execution, the European monarchies may be. I mean, what is communism? They wanted to point at Malcolm X and said, Malcolm X is meeting with Che Guevara in his international Africa tour where he's speaking at the African summit or whatever the case may be. So Malcolm X is a communist. Let me tell you something about these Black civil rights groups. The scam that was run on them. And that's Malcolm. Look, I love Malcolm X. I think Malcolm X's words and ministry have aged the best of any Black leader in history. Thomas Sowell's another one. Martin Luther King, was a profound person. Don't get me wrong. But in terms of cutting straight to a lot of what Martin Luther King said was the soulful and poetic way to say a lot of what this says. I mean, this is still reflecting a lot of what Martin Luther King said. I think Martin Luther King was genuine in it, and they often reference the I Have a Dream speech. They missed the Other America speech where Martin Luther King said, I've led my people into a burning building. I've led my people into a burning building. The dream I had is turned into a nightmare. They never talk about that during Black History Month. They never talk about what Martin Luther King felt was still left undone. Why? Because they picked it up. They wanted to freeze Martin Luther King in time and give you the I Have a Dream speech that black people are going to be the new face of the neocon, neoliberal order, the post-World War II democratic liberal order. Martin Luther King's face is what you see on this document when we talk about freedom and civil rights, ethnic and racially motivated violence, hatred, and bigotry. When you hear those words, you think Martin Luther King. When you hear those words, you think a post-KKK black civil rights struggle. They're using black people to run the whole scam. Capitalism. Capitalism was the dog and pony show that was given to the American people as the organizational focus. Right? It was capitalism. Capitalism, capitalism, capitalism. And the response to capitalism that many black leaders associated was whatever was anti-capitalist. And at the time, it was communist, Marxist, socialist, etc. And that's why a lot of these pro-black militant groups like the Black Panthers or the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X specifically, tilted towards communism and Marxism, when really many of them, especially when it comes to Malcolm X or the Nation of Islam, didn't necessarily see communism at its root. They didn't see communism as being secular. They didn't see communism as being anti-God. They didn't see communism as being a sort of totalitarian gateway drug or dystopian gateway. They didn't see it that way. All they understood was capitalism, neocolonialism, colonialism, the colonialism from the crown, from a white dominated crown, which did give us social Darwinism and a lot of the race theory that was used to promulgate certain colonial efforts. All they saw that as is capitalism. But it wasn't capitalism. It was liberalism. Capitalism is a form of economy. Liberalism was the ideology. And liberalism and communism come from the exact same place. To go all the way back to the first episode to show you the progression, because we're building a conversation. I told you the four ideological horsemen of the four horsemen of the apocalypse are ideological. And they all come from the same sequential line of thought. Out of the European post-Renaissance era, the post-Enlightenment era, secularism, liberalism, communism, globalism. These are the four ideologies that'll bring about the apocalypse. And the reason why, it's not the effectiveness of the ideologies together, individually, it's that all four ideologies blended together make it hard to pinpoint who the enemy is. And some of our greatest thinkers of all time, some of our greatest leaders, some of our most powerful and outspoken leaders of all time had trouble rightly identifying the enemy. But it was their words and their leadership that led for other young people today, such as myself, to pick up their research where they left off and expound on it. And all of those people who are trying to do that, who try and see the broader picture, who try and see the story from a broader landscape and understand the history and synthesize the history to point you in the direction of the real enemy within, all of those people are now going to be called domestic terrorists. So yes, Malcolm X may have been having conversations with communists, international communists from the African or Arab world, but it was because the pro-black mindset in the civil rights era thought about America's corruption as a product of capitalism. But it wasn't a product of capitalism. That was only knee deep. When you get waist high, you see liberalism. When you get neck high, you see secularism. And when you get all the way underwater, you realize that it's pure anti-God, it's pure anti-human. You got to think transhumanism, the fourth industrial revolution, a surveillance state, all of these things weren't even in the purview of the black man who was fighting a civil rights battle in the 60s. They only loosely knew that the FBI was probably, the government was watching them. I mean, when you think about the 60s and the narrative of the 60s and Malcolm X starting to be afraid, or Martin Luther King starting to be afraid that the government was watching them, they were actually still doing physical surveillance. They were still physically going in and tapping phones and sticking people with cameras and telescopes, high-powered cameras to surveil these people. They weren't surveilling them through data hacks and computer hacks and using people's cameras in their phones or in their laptops to listen into rooms. That wasn't even in the, I mean, if Malcolm X was alive today, his whole view of the whole thing would be different. And what they'll do is they'll use Malcolm X on one end to keep black people justified in an anti-capitalist, anti-American, anti-God, anti-Christian sentiment and say, oh, well, Malcolm X was a socialist. And on the other end, they'll keep certain white people from hearing the wisdom in Malcolm X's message by saying, well, Malcolm X was a communist, right? Malcolm X was a communist. Why would you listen to this communist man? And this isn't even a pitch to try and promote Malcolm X, because the man's words and speak for themselves, right? You can go listen and see how on point he was about any number of topics that we're still dealing with today. And he's not the only one. There's a bunch of people out there like that. I hope I can eventually interview the great Thomas Sowell before, while he's still alive. He's certainly getting up there in age, and we're none of us are promised tomorrow. I would love to be able to interview him at some point in time, because he's another great thought leader that is intentionally submerged and put off as a darling of the alt-right or a black sellout conservative Uncle Tom because he denied the neoliberal neocon order. But this is the scam that's being waged against you. And I want to take the time out today because I think this document perfectly illustrates what the real goal is. The real goal is to take away your freedom. The real goal is to take your freedoms away from you, but even more importantly, to get you to volunteer. That's the best way to do it. Now, we could come do it by force. We could come do it at gunpoint. We can make you renounce your faith by gunpoint. But the best way to do it is to use fear to get you to do it yourself. And that really is a satanic practice. When you think about Satanism, Satan's goal isn't to force you to renounce your faith. It's not to force you to say you don't believe in God, because God's smarter than that. God understands that you were forced. That wouldn't satisfy Satan. That doesn't satisfy the Satanist. The Satanist wants you to choose your damnation. They want to set up the circumstance for you to choose your damnation, for you to choose to reject and renounce God and faith in Christ. That satisfies the Satanist. That's the art of abortion. We get all you women to choose it. We get all you women to look at a postmodern radical materialist world, a postmodern radical materialist culture, economy, and say, hey, I can't provide that. I can't provide the lifestyle I see on Instagram where Kim K is putting her little baby infant like that she wears around like a designer bag and some designer clothes or sneakers in some well-lit photo shoot, I see all the women out there doing their photos when they're pregnant with the kid's father, and that's cool. I'm glad that the kid's father is there and you got the family thing going. But I see all the, I'm half naked with the baby, and I'm like got my hand on my belly, and I'm like in this weird like maternity style lingerie. You know what I mean? Zane, you know what I'm talking about, right? And they all do it. It's like a fad. It's like take a picture when you're pregnant. Take a picture in your underwear when you're 9 months pregnant to show that you're proud of your pregnant body and whatever the fuck is going on in these people's heads. I don't fucking know. All I'm telling you is, for some reason, I have the hunch that you people aren't reading this goddamn national security document. Am I making sense? You got time in the day to set up, drive to, prepare for hair and makeup, your maternity baby pictures. Meanwhile, the federal government writes documents and they use a black woman named Jean-Pierre, but you can never trust the fucking French, I'll tell you that now. Especially no black bourgeois French sellout. They got Jean-Pierre up there telling you all the justifications why a black LGBTQ woman needs to promote this tyrannical neocon neoliberal order document. And you people have a problem with me cussing on the goddamn podcast. And that's the last thing I want to discuss before we leave today. I think was it 90 minutes? Where are we at? 124. Ooh, I'm getting good at this shit. Woo, wee. They'll be coming for me next because the better and better I get at this shit, the more dangerous I become. That's what they're telling you. And here's another little info war that was played on the American people and today's free people all over the world, because we have listeners all over the world. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners outside the United States. We're able to see behind the scenes who's downloading the podcast from Apple, and we get listeners from all over the world, which I'm so thankful for, and I feel blessed. But I shouldn't say I don't feel blessed enough. That's the wrong way to put it. My blessings aren't going to keep me from cussing when I desire, when I feel it's appropriate. And it's another little info war that's been done to the American people and free people everywhere, is this whole, this convivialness, right? This sort of, this idea of being, what do I want to say? What do I want to call it? This idea of being politically correct in a way, right? We talk about political correctness, but do we go down to the root of it? The root of it is how you're supposed to conduct yourself in public, right? How you're supposed to behave in public, decorum. And all the manners of perversion that could befall the human condition or the human mindset or the human psychology or the human way of life, all of the manners of perversion that could befall us, we accept for ourselves individually, for our communities, and for our citizenship. But we want to pick a gripe about cussing. It's like we take the lowest thing possible that we could grab onto, and we superimpose that in our mind. I see it on all sides. I see it with black people like the Crown Act, where black women being able to wear their natural nappy hair in the workplace is a pressing political matter. We have to have policy around the wearing of hair, our nappy hair, in the white workplace. I mean, if white women don't tell us our nappy hair is pretty and okay, if white men don't tell us our nappy hair is pretty and okay, we got a problem. We got a world-ending type of problem on our hands, black people. Fuck off. Just to be a black woman is a revolution. We got to support our queens. We got to support black women are this, black women are that. Black women are the justification for tyranny, surveillance, intelligence community. And even furthermore, they're used in the same way Christianity is used. Because let me show you how they use Christianity on you. And the liberals are great at this. The anti-God, anti-human, anti-life movement, they're great at this. They'll get you in an argument where their position is clearly satanic, where their position is clearly anti-truth, their position is clearly anti-human. And they'll say to you, do you think you're being Christ-like? Do you think you're being Christian? Do you think you're following Christianity the way you should? And when you tell them to fuck off, they'll go, oh, well, that's not Christian. Christians don't cuss. Christians don't swear. And a lot of you Christians have folded under that pressure. That's why this new movement, smash mouth Christian populism. Smash mouth. Because that little trick where the prevailing neoliberal establishment and the media industrial complex and the mainstream narrative and all of its little drones and sheep that you get into your little online spats with, and you've learned and been conditioned to behave and talk a certain way in your responses. I'm watching how you respond. I'm watching how they attack, and I'm watching how we respond. And I'm watching how we attack, I'm watching how they respond, and it just the tennis ball back and forth just starts to look embarrassing. You all say the same shit. You're all scared to say the real shit. That's why I'm here. And if you don't like the word shit, go fuck yourself. Be worried about, carry that type of emotion about government tyranny. Carry that type of emotion about the new national security surveillance justification against the white race and anybody else who is anti-government. Have some emotion about that. Don't cherry pick. Don't pick the lowest thing possible. The thing that you can reach because you're so doubtful, because you've been born and raised and bred in a society that has radical crisis of doubt, an epidemic of self-doubt. Don't talk to me about profanity. Well, fuck yourself. And the SEC. What's the group what's the group that oversees the language of television? I think it's the SEC. I think it's the SEC. I don't know. Anyway, it's not the FEC, it's not the SEC, it's whatever, one of those organizations. The FCC, whoever it is. They oversee what language can and can't be said on television, right? Music, movies, they're in charge of the ratings, the whole 9 yards, right? They're in charge of what can. That's where the info war was waged. That's where the scam was run. That's why a podcast where I say the word fuck or shit or damn or whatever can't be on mainstream TV. You think it's because they don't want young people to be exposed to cruel language, to foul language? All of you lukewarm 501c3 Christians out there basing your Christianity on not swearing. I don't swear, and that makes me a Christian. These are your Mitt Romneys. These are your rhinos who go to church on Sunday as an act. They contribute to the plate, and meanwhile, they affirm all the corruption and wickedness and evilness that has become our prevailing neoliberal society, government. And y'all if you're stupid enough to fall for that, this podcast ain't for you. I don't like the foul language. I don't like the foul. How about the foul State of the Union? How about the rancidness of our federal government? How do you feel about that? And which people that you listen to, that you go hear, and that talk about these issues really speak about them in a real way? I just have a hunch that the people who speak about these issues that never cuss, for some reason, they're not getting to the bone of the matter. And it's not that you need to cuss to get to the heart of the matter. It's that your perception of the urgency of these things, your genuine perception of the urgency of these things will generate a certain emotion. They should generate a certain emotion. All those people they want you to think are crazy, like Alex Jones. And I wanted to surprise you, but I think the great Alex Jones may be making an appearance here in the coming weeks. I can't say when for sure, but I think the great Alex Jones is going to be joining us on Please Call Me Crazy. Steve Bannon is considered a dangerous political mind, but none of his opponents call him crazy. I want you to understand that. Go watch Alex Jones getting interviewed by what's my guy's name? Bill Maher. Go watch him being interviewed by Piers Morgan. Go watch the PBS Frontline interview. Go watch him being interviewed on a number of nightly news shows. None of them call him crazy. Go watch him being interviewed by Anderson Cooper. And none of them call him crazy. They're all terrified of him because they know he knows exactly what's going on. Alex Jones, on the other hand, is the original OG godfather of being called crazy, but turning out to be right. So it's only fitting that for Please Call Me Crazy, we go get the original, the OG, the godfather of the shit. But Alex gets theatric, and he may cuss, and he may say certain things, and he may be do it in a dramatic way. But that's the sign of the people we need to be listening to. Does it hurt your little ears when I say the word fuck? Does it make your little ears feel uncomfortable? Does it hurt your soul? Does it affect your Christian standing? Really? You really believe that? You don't think the moral hazard is letting the bastion of Abrahamic faith and God and the freedom of faith and the freedom to speak, you don't think letting the federal government, paying taxes to a federal government that wants to undermine God and every one of its policies and agendas, you don't think that has a bigger bearing on your Christian standing or the standing of your salvation than the words you use? Are you people fucking stupid? I'm sick of this shit. I'm sick of watching you. I'm sick of your little petty responses. I don't give a fuck. I look at it and I just say, this person's an idiot. They're not, this is a nothing burger. And you'll take the impossible burgers. I was at a family barbecue last night with some friends, my children's godfather, who I'm going to have on the podcast soon. And we were just having a conversation about this whole climate change racket, which is tied into this national security, because domestic terrorism is getting in the way of the climate initiative. And we were just talking about how impossible burgers are showing up on every menu. And you people's willingness to eat fucking impossible burgers. You got a problem with hearing me cuss, but you'll eat a fucking impossible burger. Right? I mean, what don't you get? This is urgent. This is happening right now. Not tomorrow, not next week. This was in June of 2021. This document is from June 2021. This was 2 years ago. This means they're already surveilling you. This is already in place. The question is what to do about it, and we're going to talk about that more in the days to come. We're going to talk about what the actual response should be, what the organization should be, what the solution should be, what's the plan of action. We're going to use this document that means to undermine our American citizenship. Fundamentally, we're going to use this document as the pretext. I don't want to say this, as a preface. We're going to use this document as a preface to start to build an action-based dialogue. And I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you exactly what we need to do on an episode-by-episode basis. I love when Steve said in the interview on Friday, he said he was quoting the general, I think, or the writer here, where the writer said the most important thing isn't to report back what you see. Not to report back to what you see to your community or to your family or even to yourself. The most important thing is to see what you see. To see what you see so you can act, right? Well, we're going to start to incorporate that into this podcast. I mean, in the first 15 episodes, I've said almost all I could say. And other things are going to pop up, and we'll continue to expand. And I'll continue to take little tiny subsections of a conversation like a Malcolm X or communism or the Civil War or the World War II or cyberspace or cybersecurity or Fourth Industrial Revolution, automation, all these things. We'll take little pieces of the argument, of the conversation and go deeper on them. But we're going to start to create an action-based dialogue, because I'm not going to let you off the hook. I'm not going to let you come to Please Call Me Crazy just to jerk off because I'm entertaining, because I'm captivating. We don't want that kind of audience. I want to see you act. I want to see us win. I want to see us actually change it, and we can win. Actually, we already are winning. That's what this document is about. This document is the fear of a change in the tide. We can win, but we have to get action oriented. And it's going to be serious, because this document is serious. This isn't go to your local Republican convention and eat donuts and have coffee and say, we got to stop arguing in the Republican Party. When we argue, When we argue, they win. That was gubernatorial candidate Kendall Qualls. Gubernatorial candidate Kendall Qualls, who lost in the primary to Dr. Scott Jensen. But not only did he lose, he was sandbagged by Mike Murphy, who, in my opinion, was another genuine America First candidate in the governor race. And we love Dr. Scott Jensen. And Mike Murphy eventually gave his endorsement to Dr. Scott Jensen. There was like a three-way split at the state convention for who was going to get the nomination. And in that, Mike Murphy got up before the entire state convention and said, Kendall Qualls is a sellout. I'm giving my endorsement to Dr. Scott Jensen. This Kendall Qualls. Now he's running around the Minnesota Republican Party conventions he's running around to different events speaking, the Uniparty, putting him out there. Same money behind him, same money behind Nikki Haley, same money behind Cicely Davis, who was my opponent in the congressional race, against the same money behind Ilhan Omar. Uniparty, Uniparty, Uniparty. You have to say it 3 times like Beetlejuice because it's old and it's decrepit and its breath stinks and it's hard to kill. These are the purveyors of the status quo. These are the steady hands. These are the people who have been picked, selected to ensure that the status quo is preserved. Kendall Qualls says the Republican Party needs to stop arguing. We need to stop cussing. We need to stop using profanity. We need to stop being so conspiratorial. We need to stop resting our elections on wedge issues like abortion or gun rights. We need to talk about the economy and inflation. Low taxes, low regulation. It's the same old tired Republic. This is the Uniparty. These are the rhinos. This is the Republican establishment that has served as the controlled opposition. This is Fox News. This is Sean Hannity. When he's not smirking and murmuring and giggling and talking about you getting robbed by some black kid in some community, he's talking about low taxes and low regulation. It's a scam. The real people are going to come to you with documents like this and say, look at these corrupt motherfuckers who are playing on the fact that you don't even read this shit. They know you won't read it because the high is too good, because the same military-industrial complex they're going to use to surveil you is the same military-industrial complex they use to build big tech to keep you distracted from it. Those are the motherfuckers they don't want you to listen to. Those are the people they hope don't run for office. They'll run a Kendall Qualls out there until the cows come home. We don't need to fight in the Republican Party. Yes, we do. There's a genuine fight that's happening in the Republican Party for a legitimate reason. Because half of the Republican Party are never Trumpers, and they believe that we need to win elections by becoming more Democrat. And not the good parts of the Democrat Party either. And there are some good parts. But they don't want the rhino establishment isn't looking for the good parts. They're looking to connect on whatever gives me the material result that I need, whatever gives me the quantitative result that I need. Logical positivism. It's not true unless we can demonstrate it through math or empiricism. The scientific method, the 4 heresies of the West. This is the type of stuff that the Kendall Qualls can't talk about. And it's not just Kendall. It's a bunch of these Republican nominees across the country that your Karl Roves and your Mitch McConnells and the rest of your rhino establishment, your Ronna McDonald's, Ronna Mitt Romneys. These are the candidates that those people are right there in bed with, along with the banks and the military and the media and big tech. And they're all there at the watering hole. It's like the NBA, the watering hole for a global corporatocracy. Well, politics is the same way. And I see it clearly because I come from inside the machine. I have a keen sense of where the status quo is. I have a keen sense of who the purveyors of the status quo are. And every time I come into a room, you see those people get uncomfortable. And it's not just the selected. It's not just the shills. It's not just the people who are the insiders. It's not just the corrupt puppets. It's a lot of you out there. A lot of you out there get uncomfortable when the person who can see the corrupt status quo walks into the room or comes onto your phone or on your television screen or underneath the lights where the spotlight's on them. A lot of you get uncomfortable. A lot of your demons are irritated. When I look at right in the camera and say, you motherfuckers are sellouts, a lot of you get, but I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop. And the even more serious warning is we are winning. If the podcast is any indication, despite what you think about my profanity, go fuck yourself. Because this podcast is growing. This steamship is rolling. This plane is getting up to altitude. The corrupt status quo try to keep me from the American people, try to keep me from free people all around the world, but the time has come where they're either going to have to be very blatant in canceling me and trying to shut me up, or this thing is going to continue to grow. Because beneath their scientific method, beneath their democratic consensus, beneath their socializing networks or their artificial intelligence, the universal truth, the truth from the one true living God resonates the most. It's the most powerful. It's going to have the most staying power. That's why the Hebrew Bible has survived the test of time through 2,000 years of cultural and civilization charnel house. And a lot of you have problems with your 501c3 Christian identity, but guess what? I understand. We'll have that reformation again. There was already a few Christian reformations. There'll be another. And if you know your scripture well, there'll be 1,000-year Christendom. We're going through that now in the church. And for all my Catholics out there, we know the warnings of a bishop, Archbishop and Vigano and the Pope. So all across society, we're having these in-house debates. So anybody who out there who tells you we need to forego any Republican arguments or disagreements for the outcome of the elections and winning, they're in on it. They're in on this agenda. Steady hands. Purveyors of the corrupt status quo. Steady hands. In D.C., the steady hands are considered the people who you can count on during rough times to do the unethical and immoral thing to preserve the status quo. Those are the steady hands. It's actually a term used in D.C. The steady hands are people who you can count on in times of trouble to forego the moral consideration to preserve a corrupt status quo. Joe Biden, pair of steady hands. Spent 40 years in D.C., knows his way in and out. When times get rough, the American economy, inflation, moral hazard, let's count on old Joe. Old Joe stabilized the ship. He's a reliable pair of steady hands. Maybe the most reliable. Who cares if he can barely make it from the car door to the front door of the restaurant? That doesn't matter. We don't need him to do that. We just need him to recite the same old narrative that the American people have accepted since time immemorial. Radical materialism. That's it for me today. It's been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio. Please like and subscribe to the podcast for updates on future content. We will be having a great family and friends guest episode, but I'll tell you more about that on Wednesday. And if I can't tell you about that on Wednesday, it's because we have 2 family and friends episodes this week. And if that's the case, you're going to be in for a real treat because the 2 potential guests are incredible guests. And I'm excited for you to be able to get to know them and hear them, and especially to host them and have them on the podcast as we start to grow. So thanks for listening again today. Go get this document. whitehouse.gov, National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism, and learn more about what the Biden administration and the prevailing neocon neoliberal order deems as domestic terrorism. Become familiar, because it was posted 2 years ago and it's already at your doorstep, if not in your house. Certainly in your schools, certainly in your neighborhoods, certainly at your school board. This has been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy. The fight continues. Godspeed.